Troubles on the Channel Zero Network.
A network of several anarchist and anti-authoritarian podcasts across so-called North America.
Listen at channelzeronetwork.com.
You are tuned into Twin Trouble, a podcast about abolition and revolution. We are twins, we like trouble.
And that's what we're going to talk about today, some trouble. Trouble against the system.
I'm Jason.
I'm Jeremy.
And we are...
Twin Trouble!
In this episode, we are pleased to have a chat with esteemed Harvard professor and historian of Anonymous, Gabriella Coleman, on current affairs and hacktivism and whistleblowing. We are also going to talk a bit about Jan 6, the first anniversary of the right-wing insurrection having just passed earlier this month. We will discuss the state of MAGA and their cries of persecution and political prisoners with regard to the ongoing criminal cases and congressional investigations into the failed coup attempt. We'll also talk briefly about our anti-fascist video game Smash MAGA Trump Zombie Apocalypse. We just released a new multiplayer version, so check that out. Lastly, we also interviewed a member of the band Armada, whose music we feature on this episode. Let's get into it. We have a special guest today, Gabriella Coleman. Many of you know her as Biella. We go way back. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Welcome. How have you been?
Well, it's great to be here. I'm in Montreal for one last day before moving to the States tomorrow.
Wow, it's been a minute. I know you've obviously covered Anonymous. You're a very highly respected and accomplished person, not just with your university work. You've done books, articles, podcasts about hackers, everything, technology, ethics, activism. So we wanted to ask you, in light of, recent events, but how has so much of the media coverage about Anonymous and hackers in general, how do they get it so wrong? Like, how?
Yeah, so first, I think it's important to note that there are journalists and others who definitely do get it right, and it's those that really decide that they want to go deep, and really dive in and talk to a lot of people. Those who kind of get it wrong, what often happens is that they kind of glom onto like one or two individuals, right? The individuals that are kind of willing to work with the journalists. Maybe they're kind of overinflate their role in this is with Anonymous, right? And when you have like a source like that, it's hard to refuse. And what happens in the case of Anonymous, which is, this very distributed, decentralized collective of collectives, a journalist will sort of portray Anonymous as having either a leader or just a couple of people who are the single movers and shakers, right? And so if you're just relying on one person, well, you're going to get a lot wrong. So that's one of the problems with Anonymous. In terms of hackers, I guess just there's a lot of sort of misconceptions around addiction and hacking, criminality and hacking. And there is just, I think journalists, are trying to kind of oversell a sensationalist story. But, there's definitely a crop of them that have been working on the technology beat and don't fall into these sorts of traps.
Right. That's an interesting point you had said about how the media kind of like wants to fixate on personalities. So they could maybe sell a human interest story, and specifically with the case of Anonymous, right? There could never be a leader or a founder. Obviously the whole idea of it's decentralized, it's leaderless, and so for the news to really pick somebody and kind of someone who's self-appointed, and we're kind of beating around the bush here. We're talking very specifically about Kartner, right? The coverage. There's been numerous articles in the past couple months, The Atlantic, a few others that the guy outed himself, named himself and declared himself like a self-appointed founder or whatever, and is kind of soliciting these media interviews, and it causes all kinds of controversy and stuff. I just want to know what your thoughts on it were.
Yeah, so have we named any names? Maybe we don't need to name any names, but recently in 220, someone came forward who, was very, very much involved in the early history of Anonymous, the trolling era, right? When Anonymous was used for ultra coordinated motherfuckery as it went back then. And often causing a lot of pain and grief in the process. And so recently someone came forward, Kurt Tanner, who was very involved, very important in that trolling era. And there's no reason to kind of doubt his role. He had a lot of documentation. He founded a board called 420chan, and there was an invasion board, and the invasion boards is where a lot of these trolling raids came off. But, you know, he kind of over-portrayed himself as a kind of leader, founder of Anonymous. And then there was a very big article in the Atlantic that featured him. And the article itself was careful not to portray him as this single leader, founder, although it so overwhelmingly focused on him, it kind of catapulted him into the limelight. And there was some tweets that kind of mentioned he was a founder. And all of a sudden it just kind of took off. Like, people went with it. It was repeated on places like NPR Marketplace. You know, I even contacted the journalist and I was like, well, that's not quite right. He never responded to me. And it's just ridiculous because, again, you know, there are movements where you could identify founders, right? The free software movement, Richard Stallman. He had an idea, he created a nonprofit. And even then, you know, the movement itself went far beyond him, right? It was only possible because of sharing the Unix source code or something like that. But with something like Anonymous, whether it's the troll era or the hacktivist era, there were so many different groups, so many different boards. And just the ways that operations, whether it was the trolling operations or the hacktivist operations, came into being, right? Like trying to kind of locate one individual as like the progenitor and generator of everything is almost ludicrous, you know? But again, it's just easier to tell a story with a single person, right? And a charisma, you know, Kurt Tanner's very charismatic, right? He'll talk to you for a very long time. So it's just easier to go that way. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, you're involved in Anonymous, right? So.
Yeah, you know, I've well, for one, you know, I'm definitely not involved in all with the day-to-day stuff about Anonymous anymore. I'm definitely not even allowed to.
Oh, no, not at all.
Right. So I'm just definitely.
You were once.
Yeah, I mean, and again, like the whole thing about it is it's a very fluid phenomenon that's made up of multiple people and multiple movements and ideologies and stuff like that. So you can't really, like, one person can't be considered an expert in this regard. As far as Kurtner, you know, I never even heard of him. He was definitely never around when any of the work that, you know, the people were doing during my era. I've heard of some of the things he's claimed to have done. And to be honest, I'm not even really all that impressed because I didn't think most of the stuff that he was involved with really contributed in any sense to the evolution of Anonymous in any positive way. That whole like transgressive Chan era, the stuff that he was talking about, I didn't think was the subversive type of transgressive. And to be honest, the more I hear about what else he's done or what he's doing now, it actually is kind of upsetting. I mean, remember, this dude he's the one who claimed that recently that he was the one who targeted the epilepsy website, right? That had affected people intentionally trying to give people epileptic seizures, right?
Right.
And he said he did this because he wanted to sabotage the more hacktivist direction that Anonymous was moving in, right?
Right, against the Church of Scientology, exactly.
Right. So why should anybody just welcome him back after he says he deliberately tried to set us back? Now that he just named himself, which is another red flag. I mean, who does that? Like, I mean, that's obviously some warning signs. And then he just declared himself a founder, and he's causing all these problems. And he's also involved in some other sketchy shit, not to mention his sketchy history. You know, there's some documentation about, you know, he's definitely, like, you know, used racial slurs in recent history. You know, some of his associates are definitely, like, federal cooperators, known federal cooperators. And he just thinks it's all funny, like it's a game. And so, you know, there's some people who are like, kind of like warning bells are going off because they kind of see, like, I kind of see the same situation like when, for example, Sabu was out there, like, being a loudmouth on the internet, a very visible figure that the media actually kind of relied on as for like a leader figure, right? I think the whole problem is like with the idea of leaders and founders is always ends up being like usually a straight white dude, like, and it just erases the history, the other work that people are doing in Anonymous, but hacktivists in general around the world. You know, it's more than, you know, even hacktivism is bigger than just Anonymous. You know, this shit dates back.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like it didn't
We're
start
not
in the
hacking.
chans. Like
Some were hacking, some were not hacking. The ones who were not hacking could have easily always just, you know, used their real name or try to convert the fame of Anonymous into like a personal brand. And everything about Anonymous was like configured not to allow that, right? So it's so bizarre to have like someone just be so public and then step forward in the limelight, and then just, yeah, a lot of journalists just kind of lapped it up, you know? Extremely bizarre. And then, I mean, the other interesting thing too is like, you know, the Chans, like, were really good at these raids, right? And one of the big raids was against the Church of Scientology, and that morphed into like an earnest protest, right? And there was something powerful about having a swarm kind of come together on the internet. But if you look at like the history of hacking and Anonymous, like the sort of hardcore hacking that happened in 2000, late 2010 and all through 2011 and part of 2012, that sprung into being after the Chans, you know, in 2010, September 2010, when a group started to kind of fight for the right to share material, basically to pirate, right? Operation Payback, September 2010. That was the kind of group or node that then, you know, morphed into something that supported WikiLeaks and then started to support the Arab Spring. And the hackers involved in that era are the ones that started to kind of hack for social justice, right? Not at all like the Kurtaner era trolls, right? So that's actually like a completely distinct genealogy and trajectory entirely.
and I don't want to go too much like specifically into Kurtner. We could talk about how, like you had said, one of the internal strengths and survival mechanisms of Anonymous is this Hydra-like decentralization. So the way these figures are, you know, ordinarily would be discouraged anyways, because they're not any real asset. But I want to say, like, how much of this is just unconstructive internet drama, just, you know, unnecessarily like airing dirty laundry and sowing divisions? How much of it is that, or is genuine like ideological differences that need this public debate, or are there people whose behaviors or associations need to be called out? Because, you know, obviously our enemies are paying close attention, just like we do to them, about like divisions in our ranks. And of course, there's also the danger that revealing, you know, embarrassing, damage, or incriminating personal details in the public, you know, because of an internet beef, that obviously could have some disastrous consequences as well. So how do we go about dealing with these figures who's going on, like, starting all this shit on the internet?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because, I mean, all movements are going to have differences, right? And you have to tolerate some differences. I mean, some differences you don't tolerate. You have Nazis that show up, you just kick them, you know, super out. But other ones, like, you know, hey, maybe we don't like fame and attention, but sometimes, you know, we live in a society that recognizes individual action, right? And so if someone wants to come along and say, you know, I want some recognition, maybe that's something up for debate, right? And so that's a great question. And in this case, I mean, I think it's just important to sort of set the historical record straight.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's important just because the power of Anonymous is precisely the fact that there was no single person, right? And one can still recognize that single individuals had an important role, and also say, but at the same time, the movement worked so powerfully because they were willing to sublimate themselves for the collective, right?
Exactly.
And so I think it's worth putting that out there. I mean, what's a shame about some of the drama llama right now is that there has been a bit of a resurgence of hacktivism, right?
Yeah.
Against the far right, and there's groups like DDoS Secrets that are keeping the torch of transparency and whistleblowing alive. And so some of this kind of drama does feel like some unnecessary division, at this time when everything does feel quite fragmented, even as kind of hacktivism is resurging some.
Yeah. Like, for example, I don't like how certain members of DDoS had been criticized or named. Not to get into specific here, but yeah, DDoS is definitely the torchbearer right now. You had said something earlier that I wanted to go back into about the publicity-seeking nature. Hackers often, the downfall is the urge to brag, right? But anyways, about like publicity seeking, there's hacktivists have known for trying to create headlines, right? But I just want to kind of bring up the opposite side of the coin, is that there's also those in the hacker underground that kind of completely rejects the outwards publicity seeking elements. Just because you get into something doesn't mean that you should immediately deface or leak data from a target. Sometimes the option is to listen for a little bit, right? And the decision is like when to act, when is the most effective. So what do you think about like the difference between these two different approaches? Why would somebody not want to engage with the media, or in particular engaging with researchers or journalists? Like, why would anybody like want to talk to somebody like you, for example? Or how does this relate to also the philosophy of non-disclosure about not reporting vulnerabilities? We were talking about full disclosure earlier. Why do you think this is? What are the strengths and weaknesses to either of these approaches?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to hacktivism, which is different from like maybe disclosing vulnerabilities, well, quite different because they really go in different trajectories. But in hacktivism, I mean, publicity is good because you drum up supporters, you maybe generate new hacktivists, right? On the other hand, it's bad because, law enforcement and others are going to shine their light, right? And so there's always a trade-off between recruitment and safety, I guess. And so, some of the more recent hacktivists like Phineas Fisher, who I know was partly inspired by you and Anonymous, has been very effective at coming and going. They strike Gamma Group, hacking team, and then they disappear, right?
Smart.
And they've never been caught, which is great. But what it also means is that like the kind of collective memory around Phineas Fisher is very short. A lot of people don't remember them. They tend not to inspire new hacktivists. I mean, they do to some degree. There was the Decepticons in Brazil that were inspired by Phineas Fisher. So I think that's one issue. The other one, too, is like the media loves to focus on, the messenger, right? And that's oftentimes the messenger is not important. It's the message that they're delivering. And so if they really, really do keep anonymous, right, then it forces the media just not to be even able to play that game, right? So it's always kind of a trade-off there when it comes to the hacktivism part.
That's a really good point. How you brought up like kind of the sources themselves, like when there's like a major disclosure, the news will often try to pick apart the person who had done it and reveal all their faults, as if that maybe undermines like kind of the truths that they're exposing. And as about these sources and the relationships that they have with journalists or whistleblowing groups and stuff. Like, for example, I mean, when you were doing your research for the work that you do, you were never observing from afar. You've always been kind of close to the action, right? You've been on these channels, public and private. I mean, what challenges would there be for somebody like kind of being in the position that you have been? Well, for one, being like kind of a public figure because you're named, but also like there's a lot of like journalists and researchers out there who have like relationships with sources now who are willing to come forward with some pretty heavy stuff, and we see this stuff all the time, especially over the past year. So what type of advice would you like give to people on both sides of the equation, for someone who has some info, who wants to do the responsible way of disclosing it, or to the journalist who might be trying to nurture these relationships with the sources? How could they protect each other but also be effective?
No, that's a great question. I mean, I do think we are really in an interesting era where if you really want to remove yourself, you really can, right? which is just kind of astounding. That was just, I mean, it was definitely possible before the Citizens Commission to expose the FBI just sent what they had gotten from breaking into an FBI field office, right, to journalists at the Washington Post and other places. And were kind of never caught and were anonymous until there was a big book written about them once the statute of limitations came out. But it's much easier to do that today. And I do think that if someone really, really, really wants to protect themselves, then that's maybe the best route to go. That said, you have to be really technically proficient to use the available tools to hide your tracks, right? It's still pretty difficult. And you can't just be like, oh, I'll log into Secure Drop at the New York Times and drop off the material. No, you need to be on Tor. You might have to be using a proxy and a few other layers, right, as well. But I also think, cultivating journalistic relationships can be very fruitful as well, right? And so it's certainly the case that you may not want to be anonymous fully, and so you do reach out to a journalist or two. And I just think, you have to do your homework, right? Which journalists are you going to trust? Why are you going to certain journalists? And actually, I would recommend, for anyone kind of interested in this topic, either kind of intellectually or maybe for more pragmatic, practical reasons, to check out Barton Gellman's book, Dark Mirror, which is on his relationship with Edward Snowden and the Snowden leaks.
Oh, yeah, Dark. Yeah, that's right. He wrote a book because he also worked with Snowden, right?
That's right. He did. And he was a little bit more removed than Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald. But I actually think, he's an investigative journalist with just so many years, decades of journalistic expertise, and just reading his book just made me think about that relationship in a slightly different way, and he was so thoughtful about the material, and what he could do with it and what he did with it later, right? Because oftentimes, like, giving over material requires more research, right? And so which journalist is going to do that research, Not all of them will go the extra mile. So I think that's something kind of to think about. But again, if you have material, more than ever, there are avenues for you to protect yourself, whether you're going to work with a journalist or if you want to be truly anonymous, right? So, like, your options are, you have multiple options, and you just have to think about which path you really want to take.
A lot of people blame the rise of the alt-right and Trumpian fascism on internet culture, specifically the chant scene. Is that fair? Now, we know QAnon, which we know has no historical lineage or association with Anonymous at all, and Anons pretty universally have come out vocally against it. But you do sometimes see some random anti-vaxxer or InfoWars clown rocking the Guy Fawkes mask, just like they get George Orwell or Rage Against the Machine so wrong. But what does the right adopting the aesthetic or tactics of hacktivism mean? Can you talk of the intersection, if there is any, between hackers and right-wing fascism?
So I'll start with the beginning, on about chant culture and the far right, and then we'll get to like QAnon and hackers. Certainly the image boards became really, really important for the far right. And I think that's interesting insofar as, Anonymous came out of the image boards as well, right? In 2008, 9, 10, and 11. And then actually Anonymous and the image boards, like, that relationship was kind of severed by 2012, 13, Anonymous was mostly on chat rooms and Twitter, and they weren't really recruiting on the boards anymore. And And I think it's interesting because it just comes to show that these boards, which, you know, are very problematic insofar as they kind of had a very freewheeling attitude where anything goes, right? It does show that people can be pulled in different directions, right? And so the fact that you had something like Anonymous and then later the far right come out of the boards is like, wow, it's a good reminder that, you know, especially young people are cultivated and recruited into different movements. And yeah, the boards in 2011, 12, 13, 14 became hotbeds for more reactionary kind of politics. And, you know, how that happened and the different actors involved, I mean, that's the subject of like multiple books, right? But it was deliberately kind of cultivated by distinct actors, from far right nationalists to Steve Bannon to others, right, who really saw the power of going to these boards where there was a lot of alienated, disaffected young people and getting them kind of energized to fight a new cultural war, right? So that definitely happened. And then weirdly, QAnon also came out of these boards, right, later. And it just comes to show that they're like living media environments that, you know, shift and also shift the type of people that are there as well, right? But it's hard to kind of, they're very hard to, like, unless you're on the boards following them, kind of piecing that history afterwards is very difficult, right? And so some people just sort of portray these boards as if like Anonymous became the far right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is, again, absolutely ludicrous. But on the other hand, if you're not following it, I could understand why you might think that. Because people use the term anonymous on the boards, right? And then later on with QAnon, especially like, even though they didn't fully take on the iconography of Anonymous, it would pop up here and there, right? And so to like outsiders, like they're just gonna think a linear story when it's anything but linear, right? It's groups that are there and then they leave the boards. Even QAnon, you know, boards like 8chan were very important to the initial genesis of QAnon. But then there was other boards that were not anonymous, other figures, QTubers, who are very public, evangelical groups, right, off the internet, who cultivated QAnon, right? So in some ways, I often see like the boards as a place where things get seeded, you know, and start to sprout. But then the very cultivation of like the garden of Anonymous, the garden of QAnon, that happens elsewhere, you know? And what's interesting too, like about QAnon is they're kind of like a cult at some level, you know?
That's cult with a Q.
It's exactly. And Anonymous, the hacktivist, came into being to fight cults, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
You have like this full circle, which is just kind of wacky to think about, how you have like a group that came into being as activists to fight cults. And like I said, broke off from the boards. And then, you know, 10 years later, these boards basically help seed a cult, you know?
Plus, Anonymous has always been about exposing the truth, fighting for the truth, right? And QAnon is obviously like an embodiment of this post-truth era that we're in, where basically people think that they're entitled to whatever facts they want, and you could find like whatever the evidence that you're looking for on the internet, because you have, like you had mentioned, Steve Bannon, you have bad actors. You have, you know, the fascists. You have corporations and governments who are deliberately like kind of manipulating technology, messing with the algorithm. You got like Cambridge Analytica, you got the recent Facebook leaks, you got bad actors who are, and that's interesting how you had mentioned that, QAnon was also kind of a top-down thing, like the drops were like signed, and we're kind of learning about who might have been behind some of it. And it could go all the way up to like Bannon and Michael Flynn and stuff like that, not to mention just the 8chan people who are known. But that kind of leads into what I was going to ask you next about like these troll farms and these psyops and right-wing misinformation, right? So what is the solution to kind of fighting this? I mean, I know you talked about like the troll farms in one of your podcasts. So, I mean, I know a lot of the right-wingers now are claiming that their free speeches are being violated because they got kicked off Twitter and all that shit, right? But a lot of activists are now, their thing is just like getting people, reporting, delivered bad actors of misinformation. And what is the best approach? I mean, is that a solution? Like, what should we be doing to fight that, but also kind of maintain like...
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just one of the toughest nuts to crack, and like solutions are not always very straightforward, I mean, certainly we don't want a couple of corporations, Facebook and Twitter, to have so much power, like that's always going to be a problem. And so people at least are sort of talking about that, recognizing that these monopolies, right, which are controlling our public airwaves, but they're private corporations, are a problem, right? And I mean, one can imagine a very decentralized tech media sphere, but I still think some of these problems would very much exist, because if the far right or alt-right is able to kind of create their own decentralized tech, right, they will also exist. And so like, having a sort of monopoly means that if they take action to deplatform them, then they have nowhere to go, right? And that's kind of like potentially a positive. On the other hand, you just don't want these companies to have so much power, and they don't act transparently. I mean, we know that especially with Facebook, right?
Right.
They really, really, really deliver content in ways that will maximize profits for them, right? Not necessarily in the public interest. But I think decentralizing tech won't necessarily just magically solve the problem either, And so I actually don't have great ideas for the tech landscape. I do think that something more fundamental is broken in our society, and that's what needs to be fixed.
No doubt. I mean, first of all, that's a good point you said about the monopoly of social media, because it should be worth pointing out that, all these social media companies routinely crack down on anti-fascist, type accounts all the time. So it's not like, but about is what you're saying, that the problem is bigger than the technology. Yeah, most definitely. Like it's, you can't blame like kind of the rise of like proto-fascism of the past couple of years exclusively on the internet. I mean, it's very much a reflection of like the haunting of racism that our society has in the United States has since its birth, right? And it's lingering still.
That's right.
And it comes in these waves, I mean, like, just when you read about the history of racism in the United States, like Stamped from the Beginning, it's a great book on the history of racism in the U.S., like a massive book. And you're like, it just comes in these waves, right? And media is always important for both the fascists and the anti-fascists, for the racists and the anti-racists, right? And like whoever controls the means of communication and whoever is better at recruitment, whoever is better at getting their message out, right, dominates in one era. And so certainly you don't want like to have very naive conceptions of free speech out there that will just sanction what everyone says and does, right? And so that's, one problem that we've had in America, where there's such a strong free speech tradition, so it's very easy just to be like, well, anyone can do whatever and say whatever they want, right? Well, maybe not, you know? But we do live in an era where people can get the word out. And generally, I think that's a better thing, you know? But what that means is that if you want to fight fascism, well, you have to think hard about recruitment as well, right? Not just about fighting the fascists, but fighting the making of the fascists, right? Like, that's just as important. We have to remember that not everyone is, you know, from the cradle a fascist, right?
And a lot of it is top down, honestly. I mean, like, we need to, like, the Fox Newses, the OANs and stuff like that are very, the Breitbart Network, the Steve Bannon stuff are very, you know, it's disappointing to talk to someone who has obviously been, like, captivated by the QAnon cult and stuff like that. They're just repeating sound bites over and over again, like, because the right is waging a meme warfare, right? I mean, and so people are just repeating it. I kind of wanted to ask you another thing, and this has to do with another shift having to do with the supporters of WikiLeaks over the years. There's been kind of a shift to the right, and it's not even necessarily about Assange or particularly, but how it seems like the right wing is now trying to claim like this exclusive ownership of the right for free speech and the rights of journalists and stuff like that, right? I mean, so how can you explain that? Like, what's going on with that? Like, why are like all these like WikiLeaks supporters also like tweeting like pictures of Pepe and stuff like that? Like, what's up with that?
Yeah. So WikiLeaks, basically lost the support of many liberals initially, and then leftists eventually, especially after 2016, where WikiLeaks kind of released emails right before the American election, and many believe that kind of helped get Trump into power, right? And that he was in part pandering to Trump to be able to kind of get some sort of pardon and become released. So he lost the support of, very understandably, of a lot of people. Just at the moment too, where again the far right, the reactionary right in the United States was gaining visibility and was facing deplatforming from the social media companies, right? So they started to cry free speech, that they were being persecuted. So then you have this like crazy cultural shift happening. And also you have like, you know, the rise of the rhetoric of cancel culture at this very same time as well, where certain people on the right were accusing leftists of, squelching speech on campus and supporting cancel culture politics. And all this kind of converged so that, basically the reactionary and the right became known for advocating for a certain type of free speech, right? And that this kind of speech they were advocating for is not necessarily the type that I personally embrace. But I do think that it's important for leftists to have a clear vision of free speech and its importance in relation to journalism and social justice, Like, I don't think that they should have, like, some universal or naive embrace of free speech politics, but they do need some more contained version of why free speech is important, right? And for two reasons. One is because we do have to protect our journalists, Like, they don't always do a great job, and I'll be the first to criticize any journalist that doesn't. But you know what? The second that journalists don't have independence and freedom, then you revert to a fascist society, right? You can't have the government, jailing journalists to get to their sources. So that's one really important thing. And then the other thing is I don't think speech is going to solve everything at all, right? Some people say, well, the problem with bad speech is that it needs to be confronted with good speech. And you're like, well, like, that doesn't really work many times, right? But nevertheless, who are the first, like at universities, to often get booted? It's the leftists or those that support Palestine.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so I work at a university, and so actually I do believe that it's important to have some parameters of academic freedom, And again, because I've seen those on the left be the ones that are most crushed by the loss of academic freedom. So I do feel like leftists need a very clear but contained articulation of why free speech is important. One that doesn't oversell it as a panacea, but one that also doesn't just completely throw it under the bus either,
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance. But I also want to hone in on one thing you had said about how kind of like the right has adopted this shit is like, first off, it's disingenuous because, the whole time when WikiLeaks was putting out stuff that exposed U.S. imperialism and militarism and war crimes and stuff like that, man, they were all calling for all these people to be locked up. That type of stuff, droned and all that shit, right? And so it really is a marriage of convenience for one, like obviously helping get Trump elected, but also like, the fantasies of like how like these WikiLeaks is going to expose like these satanic pedophile rings, like type of stuff. But when it comes to like other leaks and stuff like that, that like mean something like, hey, the Cambridge Analytica stuff, they're like dead quiet on it. You know what I mean?
Right. No, exactly. And it's just very bizarre. Like if some folks in the right would stand up precisely with other leaks like Cambridge Analytica and stuff like that, then you'd be like, oh, okay, they really do embrace this, but they do so very selectively, right?
And predictably, Trump, everybody thought that maybe he was going to pardon Assange and stuff like that. But, of course, all he ended up doing was pardon all his cronies, Bannon and all that shit, you know what I mean? So
yeah, absolutely. Trump is not like the most reliable person to, bet your future on. So, and I was very disappointed in what had happened with WikiLeaks. On the other hand, this is something I've talked about with you. I am glad that they put independent whistleblowing on the map, like that was of great service, and other groups like DDoS Secrets and XNet in Spain have taken that model and have done much better things with it. And I'll always be grateful for WikiLeaks and Assange for that. And yeah, I don't think he should be extradited for like the Espionage Act.
Absolutely not. Yeah, absolutely not.
I mean, that's super frightening. I mean, it goes back to this free speech issue, right? Like, no, we can have journalists or those that support journalism, like whistleblowing platforms, be prosecuted under an act that could lead to the death penalty.
Right.
Yeah.
Or support in any way like the notion that the United States could just go anywhere in the world and snap somebody up and bring them here and give them these charges and stuff like that.
That's right.
You brought up a few of the more recent, work that's been coming out, DDoS, I believe. What has been happening, like, over the past year? We talked earlier, this is kind of like almost a golden age of hacktivism and leaking and stuff, right? You got Epic Leaks, Blue Leaks. What are some of the new stuff that's been going on?
I mean, absolutely. It's 2020 and 2021 have been incredibly exciting for hacktivism and leaking. So in the summer of 2020, I think one of the most important acts of hacktivism was orchestrated by a group, an individual under the name Anonymous, who acquired a bunch of information related to the police and fusion centers in particular, real troves of data from emails to training manuals, and gave them over to DDoS Secrets. And what was interesting about it was both the data, which I feel like has been underutilized, it hasn't been mined and studied carefully yet. There's been a few kind of reports that have come out, journalistic reports that have come out from it, but there's so much more to do. But what was disturbing was that Twitter banned DDoS Secrets and the hashtag BlueLeaks right? And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about like, wow, the power of one company to do that, right? And it really chilled the research that was going on around it. But nevertheless, I think is really important, and that just kind of like inaugurated this like recent period where hacktivists have gone after the police. Then there was also, the hack against Epic, which is a web hosting firm, popular among the reactionary and the far right. There was also Gab leaks as well, right? And what I think is interesting about these leaks, all of them, including the police leaks, the blue leaks, is that there might not be evidence of like, earth-shattering wrongdoing corruption that you could then prosecute a single individual. But what they give window into are, movements and the culture of, for example, policing, right? And just the ways in which the police are just really, really implicated in racism or going after social movements in very problematic ways, right?
Definitely.
And so I think it's really important material for researchers to understand, social movements on the right and the kind of corrupt politics of culture among the police. And what's also exciting is that these hacktivists haven't been caught, right?
Yeah, good on them.
Yeah. So it's a little bit quieter, it's people acting more individually or in small groups. They're not inviting you to join their operations, but they're being effective, right? They're getting data out there. The data's getting out to researchers and journalists. And then I just think like what needs to happen is that there has to be more pressure on the journalistic world to use this data, right? Because it's tough stuff to wade through,
That's a lot of the work. And you brought up a good point how there's kind of like a lot of people involved in this, right? I mean, you have the initial person who came, dropped in, left, right? But a lot of the work is involved in, you said it's underutilized. It's because it's often large troves of information that oftentimes media won't want to touch. So it's on us to look and find these stories. And there's been hella stories in them. I remember the blue stuff. There is some good stuff in the fusion centers about how they're targeting BLM activists and stuff. But also, like you said, the day-to-day conversation amongst like officers, like learning how they talk to each other, kind of shatters like the public's illusion of what they think like what police are like. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot grittier. It's a lot like harsh. It's not cops and law and order, man. It's there's not even that really much difference between sometimes when you read some of these cop emails and some of these right-wing fascists, like an Epic, something like that. They're actually kind of similar, aren't they?
Right. But this is what I mean. Like, they're so perfect for getting at the ideologies, cultures of the police, which are often very racist, right? This is what you are able to access, like the training manual. There's probably nothing illegal technically in there. They're training manuals, right? But that gives you a window into like how police are trained and how they come to think of people, right?
Yeah.
In very problematic ways. It's like a gold mine. It's funny because I was reading up on Blue Leaks a little bit in anticipation of this, and then I was just like, oh my God, can I get a PhD student that just goes through this material and writes like an ethnography of the police through Blue Leaks, because there's so much out there, right?
That's a good point how you said a lot of what the police were doing actually isn't illegal. And in some of these training manuals, they're basically entirely justifications, legal justifications of how the police are saying, here's how you can be a brutal racist piece of shit, right? But yet still stay within the confines of the law.
That's right. And then one can, with this material, go, okay, and yet this is still a problem, right? Precisely because of, what they're encouraging, but also because of how they're able to kind of skirt the law in the process, right? But yeah, I really admire both the individuals who are giving this data over and then groups like DDoS Secrets who are hosting it and making it searchable and putting it up there. Because, like, again, there's not going to be, many groups who do that. And, they've also, at times, even with Blue Leaks, they redacted information, right, to protect individuals. I mean, they lean towards more exposure rather than less, but they do take some precautions. I believe with Gab Leaks, they made that only available to researchers and journalists. They didn't publish it. There was just too much individual information. I mean, another really interesting thing is how ransomware groups now are releasing emails. And, and journalists and DDoS Secrets are publishing emails released by, these ransomware groups who are just wanting to make money. Mm-hmm. But it's an effective way to, gain public support maybe, or maybe help, it's a little bit maybe Robin Hood, as they take some money, they give something back. It's a really interesting new development, though.
Yeah, I think what the DC leaks were ransomware leaks.
Yep.
And yeah, that's an interesting development, right? I mean, they may not necessarily be doing it for the same ideologically motivated reasons that say some of us might, but the effect is the same. It's oftentimes, like you said, you focus on the source and their foibles, but really the truth speaks for itself. And amongst one of those truths, look at the Blue League stuff is we were talking about how it's within the confines of the law. Well, that makes me think every time someone says something like, "Oh, the police, it's a broken system," or is the police are bad, or it's like, well, actually, they're behaving exactly as they were originally designed to do, and how the rules of the system are built in a certain way. And then we see for ourselves how these rules are written and what they're teaching them. And it's not broken. They're doing exactly as what they were designed for.
Right. And it also goes against this simply bad apple theory, It's like, well, sure, of course there can be some particularly noxious individuals, right? And not every cop is a white supremacist. But there's a culture, right? And people get trained in that.
Yep.
And that is systemic. And again, you get a window into that through these manuals.
That's why we say all cops are bastards.
Biela, it's so good to talk to you. What's next for you? What you doing?
What am I doing? I'm trying to get to the States. No, I mean, but I literally am just trying to get to the States. I've been trying to get there for the last 10 days. No, I mean, I hope to, so I've been, working on Hack Curio, which is this video portal into hacking, and I will kind of pick that up again. Some of the things that we've talked about, I'm writing about for a book of essays.
Cool.
And I also hope to get a hacker archive project off the ground at my new job as well.
Sweet.
Never a boring moment.
No. Nope.
All right. I also want to ask you, what did you think of kind of the narrative that the hackers start out young and wild, might call themselves even hacktivists or black hats, and people get in a little trouble, but then when the pressure is on, you kind of have to grow up. It's it's this thing that you just sell out all the way that you end up working in the cybersecurity industry, InfoSec, the same companies and governments that you once fought against. It's like this rite of passage, at least in the United States, tropes dragged out repeatedly. And for some reason, it's kind of accepted here, right? As if you don't lose your hacker credentials. What's up with that? And I also want to ask you, what role that the university plays a part in that pipeline to working in the security industry.
Yeah. So that is a common trajectory. And I think part of the problem is that, they're just such lucrative jobs. The cost of living is so high. It's just very easy for people just to go down that path. And yet what is a shame is that, and this connects to the university thing, which I'll get to in a moment, is that, if there were just more jobs in the tech world, and they don't have to be at all crazy venture capital, high paying jobs, but decent salaries, right? I think more people would go for those jobs, you know? I'll never forget once, like, a student who I ran into was like, yeah, you know, do you know of any jobs kind of in the nonprofit tech world that I can go to? Because he was really against like working for the military, you know, or doing like crazy AI stuff. So he, all he did was kind of like he worked in the kind of world of like tech and retail. He felt like that was the most, you know, least harmful or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I was like, yeah, you know, you're right that there's not like a whole lot of jobs in the kind of non-corporate, non-military world in tech, you know, and we need to kind of build that up. And someone who is building that up is Nathan Schneider. He's actually a professor at University of Colorado in Boulder, and he's trying to kind of like bring the idea of the co-op to the tech world, you know, like tech people can come together. So Nathan Schneider is precisely trying to do that, trying to kind of create the idea of the tech co-op, right? Where instead of kind of organizing yourself as a kind of corporation, which you sell to a venture capitalist, you configure yourself as worker owned and run, right? And then create technology that can help society. And, you know, then create also like a co-op where everyone has a living wage, right? And so like, man, that's what we need, you know?
That's a vision right there. Yeah, a lot of people like you know, me, for example, like we're trying to find a way to like use our skills in a meaningful but ethical way that doesn't contribute to, you know, the military industrial complex or like the big algorithm, you know, designing like facial recognition software that ends up helping law enforcement or border patrol, something like that. Like, and you said it's money, and that, you know, it's kind of sad. Capitalism like is, you know, basically promising like these privileges and positions and power to people who do have the capability to do that. And I could see why. I don't agree with it at all, but I could see why someone who maybe like has never really experienced anything in their life like would see why there's nothing wrong with doing that, or they're just doing it for the check. And we have to undermine this. We have to undermine the fact that people think it's acceptable to go work for like and we've had our victories, you know what I mean? Like, remember the time that people pressured Google to drop their contract with the military over
Right.
the AI thing. And so that I think is a good step in the right direction to show that, you know, these tech workers, maybe they're not class enemies. Because, I mean, right now I'm not convinced, you know what I mean, honestly, because they built the system and we're all suffering under the system. So.
No, exactly. And we have to have like strategies that provide exit and alternatives, right? Both in terms of worker autonomy and then building tech for good, you know? And the only way you're going to do that is in a nonprofit model, right? It's like win-win, worker collective, and then build tech for good, right? And just, I think we need more of that. And, you know, the university isn't nurturing that, with very few exceptions. I mean, universities cater either to research that serves military purposes or more and more for like Silicon Valley type, you know, companies. And there's very few exceptions. Like Princeton, for example, has a lot of public interest technologists in their computer science department, like Ed Felton, who's very famous. And so a lot of people kind of go into policy and public interest tech, which is great. But, you know, we can't just have like military, Silicon Valley, and then like a couple of universities that funnel people to public interest technology, right? That's just not enough.
So is there hope for the youth?
Is there, well, you know, I do think that there is, because, I mean, they're just inheriting such a fucked up world, you know? And, like, because of that, they will actually probably have to fight, right? For kind of a revolution for survival, you know? And it's sad because people in our generation and above left them this mess, right?
We failed. It's your turn.
Exactly. So, I mean, I do have like hope, but in some weird way, because of our massive failures. And of course, we're still around. We still have to and will fight, you know? but things just have to change. And so there are ways out of this, whether it's, again, how people come together to organize, how people come together to work. And we can't get rid of technology. It's here, right? I mean, we just can't fully go back to a pre-technological era. I mean, we've had technology since for millennia, but how we make our tech, how we use it, and what we use it for, that has to change.
NFTs. Really quick, one line.
Okay.
No, I was
I
just
hate
fucking-
NFTs.
I was just fucking with you. But I got the quote I wanted now, so I'm good. Like,
Cool.
All right. Wow, it's been good hanging with you.
Yeah.
I never thought there'd be a day we're clapping on the road that began to spread, resemble death on replay. Programmed to disappear, wired to self-destruct, while I keep blaming life for 3, 2, 1. All on my own. All on my own. All on my own. All on my own. It's all me.
We are living in a dark age of disinformation. Formerly pro-establishment, the so-called patriots have ripped open a parallel universe where they lose all faith in their country and engage in open rebellion. They are anti-system now, fresh after licking Trump's boot. We've seen the big lie, the stop the steal coup attempt, the failed insurrection. Now we're in the midst of the far right's pivot to defy the vaccine and mask mandates, in which they see as proof of Biden's tyranny and a worthy battleground for these wannabe Civil War secession types.
But the pivot is based on a conspiracy theory and a terribly deadly lie that this virus is not a big deal. It's COVID denialism. Anti-vax propagandists spread misinfo and cause people to not trust legitimate medical information, refuse life-saving vaccinations, and thus extending the pandemic and contributing to mass death. Even the biggest denialist, Trump himself, has been begging his supporters to take the vaccine because he wants to claim it was his idea. But his base supporters are in too deep now, and they don't want to hear that shit, so now the GOP can't mention the vaccine without potential political blowback from their radicalized base. We could be having conversations about basic information and best practices to resist the plague, coming up with reasonable solutions for society to safely function, addressing global vaccine inequities, but instead we argue with the cult of ignorance over basic truths to this virus. So many of the anti-vax culture warriors are volatile, eager for a soapbox, eager to live stream themselves getting kicked out of restaurants by cops they claim to support. They say they feel like they're being treated like second-class citizens, insultingly comparing their struggles to that of the civil rights movement, saying the mandates are like racial segregation and apartheid. They compare the unvaccinated to the victims of the mass murders of the Holocaust under the Nazis. They say this with a straight face as they rail against the teachings of actual history and the current reality of racism in America. They say my body, my choice about vaccines, but simultaneously want to end Roe v. Wade. They talk about electoral integrity, while meanwhile the GOP, using these very same conspiracy theories, pushing harder than ever to further erode voting rights, with many states passing racist laws designed to prevent people from voting, all in plain sight. This mind-fuckingly offensive upside-downedness signifies that the problems in this country run deeper than just what happened on Jan 6.
But neoliberalism is also on the same spectrum of denialism, also committed to apocalypse capitalism, with a rush to go back to normal, ending pandemic relief and ushering everyone back to work and school amidst the Omicron surge. This sociopathic lack of empathy is also exemplified by this growing belief that the pandemic will last forever and we should just get used to it. That the new variant is only mild. It's fine. It is only the most vulnerable who are affected by this new variant. The loss of life was always in the economic calculus inherent to the logic of capitalism. There exists a level of disease and death that is to be acceptable. So we're not forgetting the Dems' complete failure to handle the pandemic response adequately to the magnitude demanded of the moment. They are also kicking people to the curb as well. We are glad to see people rejecting and resisting this. Particularly moving are the CPS students in Chicago who have walked out of classes for their rights to safe education during COVID times. This is an inspiring sign that the kids are all right, despite the city which continues to fail them with massive funding for cops and not for schools, enforcing in-person classes despite the teachers and students struggling for the continuation of remote learning during the surge of the Omicron variant.
Others, however, seem to be working to help spread the plague. These foaming at their infectious mouth anti-vaxxers, these MAGA zombies, have not given up the fight. Just listen.
You are listening to the sounds of Gen 6 Capitol rioters singing the U.S. national anthem in the so-called Patriot wing of the D.C. jail. Haunting. Apparently, in a cult-like fashion, they sing it every night at 9, and according to Marjorie Taylor Greene, they sing with, quote, such passion and true devotion for their country, you could hear it in their voice. She, Matt Gaetz, and other pro-insurrection GOP lawmakers had visited the imprisoned insurrectionists in a publicity stunt to rally support for the Jan 6 political prisoners, as they call them, who they claim are suffering abuse in a two-tier justice system. Earlier this month was the anniversary of the Jan 6 right-wing coup attempt, and as fallout from that fateful day is still ongoing, we reflect on the significance of the attack on Congress to overturn the 2020 election. Trump's insurrection failed that day, but the violent white supremacist extremism in which Trumpism is a symptom of remains as a constantly looming fascist plague that haunts the country. The same people who went on a rampage over the election at the end of 2020 and at Jan 6 continue to wreak havoc and have now gone local, pivoting to harassing school board over mask and vaccine mandates, causing disruptions, even sometimes at healthcare facilities, demanding ivermectin and making death threats, complaining about being discriminated against for their medical status, being denied service, all while denying the realities of COVID as we are in the midst of this surge. As we enter the midterm election year, the likelihood of far-right mobilizations and insurgent violence remains higher now than ever before. Instead of forming a separate MAGA or Patriot Party as thought possible immediately after the attack, Trump and his loyalists have decided to double down and stay with the GOP as the dominant force in the party. They're seeking to make internal purges of rhinos, or Republicans in name only, those deemed unloyal who don't bend the knee to Trump. Unicorn Riot recently wrote up a comprehensive investigative summary of the fallout of Jan 6, and It's Going Down's most recent episode of This Is America podcast also breaks down this attempted power grab of the insurgent far right. Since Jan 6, right-wing media has done everything they can to minimize the significance of the attack. They first tried to deny the whole thing was MAGA, saying it was Antifa infiltrators. Then they tried claiming it was an FBI setup. Then it was merely just a group of tourists. And finally, the whataboutisms, making a false equivalency between the Capitol riots and the George Floyd uprisings of the summer. The latter they claim was far worse. Entire cities burned, they cried. But it was Trump who whipped up his fascist supporters into a frenzy, and after the election they came out in droves to D.C. Jan 6 came on the heels of the Million MAGA marches, practice runs for Jan 6. Of course, its numbers were more like in the tens of thousands, but they were fucking fascists who were very open about their plans for violence. Proud Boys, self-proclaimed militia, the army for Trump, they marched each evening and attacked people in the street and terrorized the city and country. Similar rallies had been happening at state capitals as well. Each night was inches from becoming deadly. Yet, it was only after Jan 6 did the DOJ say their priority is to investigate and prosecute these white supremacist extremist groups.
Around 750 individuals so far have been charged by the feds for participating in the Capitol riots. Many low-level misdemeanors like parading on restricted grounds, but there are also hundreds of felonies, including assaults against police, interruption of federal official processes, and most recently conspiracy and sedition in the cases of Stuart Rhodes and 10 other members of the Oath Keeper militias. 350 felonies, but almost everybody, except like 40 people, are out of jail. Most were granted bail or already had their cases adjudicated. Many have already accepted cooperating plea deals. Almost everybody got extremely light sentences, such as probation or a month or two in jail. Only a few have received any real time. The most so far is Robert Palmer, who got 5 years for beating a cop with a fire extinguisher. And then there was a QAnon shaman, Jake Chansley. He got 40 months. He's at the low in FCI Safford. There's still other cases pending, and some of the more serious and complicated conspiracy charges could drag out for some time in what they called the largest federal investigation in U.S. history.
While the pawns have taken some heat, the architects of the Jan 6 coup attempt continue to skirt accountability. The Jan 6 committee is finally getting around to issuing subpoenas for Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, Nick Fuentes, and other high-profile leaders and propagandists of the big lie. Trump and his closest minions have so far refused the subpoenas and are dragging it out in the courts by filing lawsuits against releases of information and slamming the Jan 6 Commission on Investigation as a Marxist witch hunt. He is still out there saying he won in 2020 while he and the GOP are plotting the next coup in 2024. None of them have spent a day in jail for their crimes and probably won't.
And all these Trump officials refusing the subpoenas, they lock people up all the time for contempt. Hell, I did an extra 6 months for contempt, really a year, as we talked about in earlier episodes. So it's like, what the hell? It's infuriating to see these powerful, horrible people just get away with this. Like fascist horror show Steve Bannon. He was pardoned by Trump after scanning millions on that racist border wall. So now he's got 2 criminal contempt charges, but they let him out on bail. And when any of us had asked for bail, they were all like, well, that would undermine the coercive purpose of detaining you for contempt. Bannon's trial still half a year away, all of them just walking around like it wasn't nothing. And the Jan 6ers too. Nearly all of them got bail or probation, never saw jail. And there's just so many more examples of the gross disparities with how Trump's crew, how the Jan 6 insurrectionaries, they've been treated so lightly as compared with how most others experience the criminal justice system. Which is to say, when it's us, if there's any way to interpret or manipulate the law to be against us, the worst case scenario, that's what's happening. But here they are, basically cashing in on the full benefits of white privilege and their political connections to those in power.
One thing we have seen overemphasized about Jan 6 is the cry from the right about the so-called political prisoners. Much can be said about the imprisoned insurrectionists' complaints about conditions in the jail. Liberal knee-jerk reaction is to say, lock them up. They deserve every ounce of misery they get. While relishing in the irony of Back the Blues, don't do the crime if you can't do the time, is momentarily amusing, nobody should be sourcing their pleasure in the suffering of our enemies by the prison system. This is the rub we want to get into. What is the abolitionist perspective in regards to Jan 6 prosecutions?
Prison abolitionists have consistently held that police and prisons aren't ever solutions, that they need to be shut down immediately, that everybody needs to be freed unconditionally. We aren't with lock them up as much as we may detest their politics or actions. It's actually a little worrisome that these liberals are looking for catharsis or revenge or closure or whatever through imprisonment. And how often have they also argued the same for us? So we've got to beat back the liberal lust for carceral solutions.
The enemy of our enemy is not our friend. And central to anarchist, anti-fascist, or any kind of organizing is the refusal to work with or rely on the state to solve our problems. The punitive act of incarceration is an act of harm itself, and instead of keeping people safe, it destabilizes the community. Has imprisoning a few of the rioters prevented those on the outside from engaging in the same kind of violent agitation that we've seen on Jan 6? Maybe in the immediate aftermath, but here we are a year later. Proud Boys are still regular fixtures of right-wing mobilizations, and the violence continues, likely to increase as we enter midterm election year.
And look at how they're now rallying behind January 6 defendants as heroes, patriots, political prisoners. There's a lot of websites: Patriot Freedom Project, Citizens Against Political Persecution, American Gulag, that one run by Jim Hoft, the founder of alt-right disinfo site The Gateway Pundit. These are support sites for Jan 6ers, plus the hundreds of fundraisers on GiveSendGo.com, the Christian fascist alternative to GoFundMe. They're like, it's shocking to say, but America now has legitimate political prisoners en masse, as if the government is somehow targeting them for their politics or race, as if their murderous fascist coup attempt is some great political act worthy of defending. To defend as, say, raising millions and millions of dollars, definitely some grifting going on. So they're trying to gain sympathy about their cases, their jail conditions, while at the same time making sure to spit out their delusional belief that BLM was supposedly treated so lightly by comparison. Basically, the grievances and analysis extends only to freedom and better conditions for their own fascist warrior clowns that Trump used up and kicked to the curb. They don't ever speak up for others affected by the prison industrial complex. They deny the existence of actual political prisoners and prisoners of war. They defend the cops each and every single time they get away with murder, or they defend people like Kyle Rittenhouse who basically fulfilled their bloodlust fantasies. So after they riled up their most rabid Trump cultists to throw their sore loser riot at the Capitol, and a few of them end up in jail, now they want to cry persecution. They want special treatment, unlike the other criminals who they believe deserve to be in prison. They believe they are the exceptions, really hitting home the point that the prison system was from the beginning never designed for people like them. And so it's understandable why some people would find enjoyment and poetic justice in seeing the tables turned for a change. These Jan 6ers, majority middle upper class, cis white men of privilege, they're just now experiencing a taste of what everybody else had always been subjected to, had to eat the same bologna sandwiches we all had to eat, and now they're crying, writing manifestos from jail. This isn't what America's about. Really, though? People have been fighting against that notorious DC jail forever, and now, only when these special right-wingers, these white people, start complaining about it, the government felt like it had to do something to address their astroturfed fury. So last month, the U.S. Marshals did an unannounced inspection of the D.C. jail and found that they were not in compliance with the minimum detention standards. First off, there's never an unannounced inspection. Obviously, they're always scheduled and carefully choreographed.
The inspectors are good friends with the warden. They're often former wardens themselves. They'll have already repainted the walls. They'll already have lined up several bootlicking inmates if they want to question anybody. They'll just rubber stamp the process, make themselves look good. The dog and pony show. Anyways, I'm very familiar with the U.S. Marshal detention standards. Stuff like square foot per person, number of toilets, showers and sinks, food conditions, access to hygiene, recreation, medical care, etc. So there's like 50,000 federal prisoners, mostly pretrial or in transit, currently held outside the Bureau of Prisons in these raggedy county jails and detention centers, and they're really terrible places. Basically, none of them follow the standards, and it's only gotten worse since the pandemic. I remember 2 summers ago during the height of COVID, they suspended all transfers and we were stuck in transit in Oklahoma City. Not the FTC, but the local overflow jail in Grady County Jail. And it was just the worst place to be caught during the pandemic. Dorms of triple stacked bunks. They were in staunch denial that COVID had completely swept the dorms, and people are trying to get lawyers and Congress to look at these obvious detention standard violations. We got no traction, no answers. So literally everybody caught COVID, people died. People are still dying, and it's like this everywhere because the prison system is simply unable and unwilling to protect people even 3 years into the pandemic, and we still have not seen the mass releases that people have been demanding that are so urgently needed. So when I read these statements of these Jan 6ers, once you get past the rhetoric, most of their complaints are really just kind of basic jail conditions. For example, bad food or the 23-hour-a-day lockdown. And I don't mean to say this to trivialize these conditions, because we've experienced it ourselves, and it's terrible, and it all needs to end. But you don't see these Jan 6ers interested in advocating for prisoner rights as a whole. They're not linking up with existing abolitionist groups, of course, or demanding an end to solitary confinement. They're not going on hunger strike in solidarity with those at Rikers Island or Stateville or in Palestine.
Really, it's because they support these systems. Law and order. They're part of it. It's an anomaly that any of them are in jail at all, which is what they really mean when they claim they're being discriminated against for being conservative or being white. Most of them are used to just getting away with shit. Their crimes are the officially sanctioned ones, done in the name of business. In actuality, with the millions of dollars raised in support from these high-profile backers, they have so much more power, influence, and protection than anyone else, not just when it comes to how their cases are being handled in the courts, but also in the prisons themselves. They talk about the jail food, but unlike everyone else there who got to eat the regular shit, remember, they raised millions. I guarantee their commissary bags are full each week and burning up the phones too. Prison administrators are going to treat them very carefully to avoid retaliatory lawsuits and public attention. There's been some claims that individual guards have insulted them for being white or whatever. One guy claims he was beaten by guards because he was trying to start a Bible study group, supposedly. But it sounds like there's more to that story than they're letting on. I bet many prison guards are supporters too. So with all the connection and influence, with support from people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, they finally got the marshals to admit that the jail is a dump, and they immediately began moving 400 people into the federal prison in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. But hilariously, the inspectors actually found that the treatment unit that most of the Jan 6ers are being held at was actually in compliance with the standards, was actually in far better shape than any of the other units that the marshals had denounced. Turns out they had it sweeter than everyone else, but they were still crying. One Proud Boy who had been moved to Lewisburg actually requested transfer back to the DC jail, and 1 week later was back with the others.
Yes, most of these Jan 6s are being held in their own unit where they've developed cult-like rituals, and they're being groomed by the right as these patriotic martyrs. The whole experience is sure to push them deeper into the reactionary rabbit hole. One Jan 6er, Thomas Sibick, requested and was granted transfer out of there because he couldn't deal with the toxic environment. So they're in this reactionary echo chamber. Most have basically no interaction with other prisoners, and they might not ever, really for their own protection. But the few that might actually be sentenced to some real time, I think the longest so far got 5 years, the dude who hit the cop with a fire extinguisher. I think they might be transferred to real prison eventually, and it's hard to say how they're going to make it, especially on their own away from their compatriots. They're hardcore Back to Blue supporters, this law and order and all of that, and many of them are former cops themselves, so they probably think that they're somehow above other prisoners. Well, they're going to have a very rude awakening in general population. Unless they're sent to like a camp or a low, it's likely many of them are going to check in and request protective custody, do the rest of their bid by themselves in the hole. People like Derek Chauvin or Dylan Roof. But remember, even then, on a long enough timeline, you could still get got. Like how Dylan Roof was beaten up on the way to the showers. It's also probable that they would seek protection from and fall in line with white supremacist gangs like the Aryan Brotherhood, with whom they share an obvious affinity. Because these groups, they're very organized and they're in almost every prison, it's really an unaddressed problem that prison is basically a factory that fosters conditions that creates white supremacists from the same fake victimhood and racial resentment that these insurrectionaries are espousing now. There is a potential these groups reinforce alliances and imprint lifetime commitments to their cause. Even if they're a bunch of ineffectual, ignorant clowns, they could become far more dangerous when they're released and return to their fanatical hordes, now heralded as heroes. So obviously, prison can never be a solution to this problem, which is another reason why anti-fascists consistently refuse to work with the state.
And if you look at what the jailed and arrested insurrectionists are saying, it is quite clear that even after a whole year, most of them regret nothing and are proud of their actions on Jan 6. They still buy the big lie. They still believe and talk about how patriots are rising up and going to overthrow this fake Biden and bring back Trump. Unfortunately, we are probably going to see more high-profile insurgent violence, as extremist researchers are noting that the level of activity and violent language emanating from far-right cycles is as high as it was just before the Oklahoma City bombing. Although much of their frustrations are directed to the federal government or the mayors and governors of big cities and blue states, still they are on some Turner Diaries shit, imagining violence inflicted on BLM and anti-fascist activists who they see as race traitors and communists.
So the DOJ announced on the anniversary of Jan 6 the formation of a new domestic terrorist task force, ostensibly to deal with this, and although carceral liberals have cheered it on, we really should be worried, especially about this whole both sides language around extremism that this task force seems to undertake. Everyone knows they always have and will continue to weaponize this against leftist and BIPOC communities, and probably a lot more so considering the long and well-documented racist history of the FBI.
Look at the vagueness of the language to see the clearness of the problem. They say the biggest threats are from extremists, quote, driven by racial or ethnic beliefs, which they note includes white supremacists, but also would include, quote, black identity extremists, a term invented by the feds under the Trump regime to delegitimize BLM activists so they could pursue more serious terrorist enhancements. They talk of, quote, anti-government sentiments, including militia and anarchists, as if they are the same thing. Although the FBI has previously stated that Antifa is an idea, not an organization, that has not at all slowed the continued targeted harassment of anti-fascists, as we have already seen the Department of Homeland Security do earlier this year by blaming Portland riots on another new term, quote, violent Antifa anarchist-inspired individuals. A lot of the uprising arrests that happened during the height of Trump's rage when he sent feds to all the cities are still fighting these trumped-up charges with the full weight of Biden's Department of Justice.
Just thinking of Daniel Baker, anarchist prisoner who was recently sentenced to 40 months for posting on Facebook about the need for armed self-defense against the right-wing coup that was bound to happen on Jan 6. Now, he never brought a weapon to any building, and his online hyperbolic statements pale in comparison to the mass calls of violence made by the hordes of Jan 6 riders, yet he got more time than all but one of them so far. Another person, 20-year-old Shamar Betts, was imprisoned for also putting up a Facebook post about an action in Champaign, Illinois, calling for people to get busy after the police murder of George Floyd. Some looting broke out, and the feds arrested him a week later under the 1968 Anti-Riot Act. They gave him 4 years, again for a Facebook post, in addition to an absolutely absurd $1.6 million fine. So to embrace the authoritative punitive power, to add to law enforcement's toolbox in any way, even if it is ostensibly also being used against the fascists, won't work to our advantage in the long run. The state is our enemy no matter which ruling class party wields the throne. Just like the GOP has, the Democrats will weaponize increases in security and anti-terrorist forces against anarchist and leftist movements.
So we oppose the expansion of the DOJ terrorist task force. But fuck the DOJ for a second. Let's talk about ways everyday people have been resisting the MAGA menace. Anti-fascists have been documenting and confronting the rise of fascism since before Trump, and in the wake of Jan 6, it is good to see that more people are getting into anti-extremist work than ever. But in doing so, we need to be careful to not reinforce carceral anti-fascism. Abolitionists envision and practice accountability outside the prison system. Can we not imagine other tools to fight fascism except for the ones primarily used to oppress black and brown people? How do we demand freedom for all prisoners but also not wish to replicate the violence of the prison system against our enemies? In the wake of January 6, groups like Sedition Hunters have done a lot of online sleuthing, poring over the massive amounts of available video, creating hashtags for the riots until their true names are identified. It is, of course, helpful to know who these fuckers are. They should be exposed for their actions that day. But then, many people are tagging the FBI as if they are on the same side. Aiding a federal law enforcement investigation in order to put people in prison should not be the purpose of researching extremists. These are not long-term solutions, not likely preventative of future attacks, nor likely to de-radicalize their base. As we are seeing, the jailing of the Jan 6ers bolsters the MAGA mythology, that Biden has reigned in the tyrannical New World Order and giving further cost to these wannabe patriot revolutionaries. What everyday anti-fascists are doing and have been doing is paying attention to what the far-right groups are doing in their area and around the country or world, and then taking action and putting some pressure on them to disrupt their organizing. Some ideas that allegedly exist include documentation or doxing of these local fascists, organizing call or email campaigns to get them fired or removed from office, flyering their neighborhoods or hangout spots, calling venues to get their events canceled, and of course, organizing counter-protests and showing up when they show up to the school boards or town halls with an alternative message. This does far more to put the fascists on notice than to call the cops. And besides, we already know whose side they are going to be on anyway. While we are recording this episode, a major development has taken place. Unicorn Riot and Distributed Denial of Secrets has released about 500 gigs of leaks from Patriot Front chats and emails. The leaks were dropped as these white supremacists were in D.C., escorted by cops as they marched alongside the anti-abortionist organization March for Life. These leaks are massive and are now available for researchers to get into. Amazing. Included is documentation of their various hate crimes, embarrassing videos of their pathetic trainings, their internal communications which reveal plenty of identifiers, already leading to plenty of their members being exposed and doxxed. It shows the laughability of their security. It shows the deep connections Patriot Front has with Proud Boys. It shows that most of the members of Patriot Front self-identify as National and Socialists, as Nazis, utterly destroying the ridiculous attempts at distancing by right-wingers who claim that Patriot Front is not a real group but a Fed operation. It shows that if you are a Nazi, you will be exposed. It shows a lot, and we are excited to see the depth of shit to come out from this Patriot Front leaks. Most importantly, the leak shows that it is anti-fascists who are the ones doing the real work to handle the Nazi problem in this country. The U.S. government is committed to ignoring the threat besides slapping a few light sentences on the insurrectionists from Jan 6. But when Patriot Front comes to town, you will always see the cops leading the march and protecting them, allowing them the street, allowing them safe escape when invariably people chase them down, shouting, chanting, and laughing at the pathetic sight of these white-hooded modern-day Klan.
The Chuds are still active, standing back and standing by, just waiting for the next insurrection. They are back in full revolt again, rallying all the goddamn time, worse now that we are entering this midterm election year. Best to stomp them down now before the hordes get too big again. I guess you could say it's time to Smash MAGA! Hey, so have y'all played our game Smash MAGA yet?
We just dropped a new version on the anniversary of Jan 6, in contemptful observance of that cursed day when America showed its ass. The story of the game is that a fascist plague sweeps the nation, entering a dark age dystopia of zombified Trump supporters that threaten the free world. The events depicted in the game are based on real-life occurrences during the Trump regime. It's satire, but it's also a call to action. We want people to reimagine these events as if it could have gone differently if people were mobilized to stop the plague of fascism before it spreads.
The biggest update in this new version is the multiplayer feature. Firstly, you could plug in a gamepad and do local two-player co-op, which is way more fun taking on the brainwashed masses as a team. But there's also internet multiplayer, where you could jump on our game servers and play with or against others online. There's the regular modes like cooperative, deathmatch, capture the flag, we got laser tag. And you can compete in the high scores table. We're doing a monthly tournament to win prizes like zines and t-shirts.
There's also one new level that takes place in Mars Alago, where Trump teams up with the rich man villain of the year, Elon Musk, in a plan to spread MAGA toxicity to Mars, to escape a planet undergoing mass devastation by climate change.
We're also pleased to say that Smash MAGA is also now available on the Steam gaming platform. If you'll remember, Steam, just like Apple and Google, had previously banned us from their platform for some suspect justifications. Remember, for Google it was political violence. For Apple it was, quote, offensive references to targeted groups such as MAGA. So Steam claimed it was, quote, copyright infringement, and initially wouldn't point to any specific violation. Obviously, we have full fair use, public figures, parody, satire, etc. We don't even really have to get into it. But months after appeals and assurances that we don't have any copyrighted content, they eventually gave it the okay, and so we're on. And we're getting a lot more exposure too, way more than our initial release last September, which, says a lot about how these corporate platforms position themselves as gatekeepers as to what apps make it or not, and of course what people are even allowed to run on their devices in the first place.
So we released the game, it's been fun playing multiplayer, and also reading the reviews and comments we've received so far. Now most people thought it was a blast, some also had constructive criticisms. But we also had some real hateful comments from these right-wingers, of course. The usual ignorant shit. Rittenhouse supporters posting racist memes, talking about how they're going to report us, how we should be taken down, which is hilarious because cancel culture, right? These toxic parts of the gamer community, our game is calling them out, mocking them, and now they're crying, and we knew that was going to happen. They're mad, it's cool.
So what's next? Nobody believes the events on January 6th signaled an end to Trumpism. It only showed us how real the fascist threat has been, with no clear end in sight. What is the next battleground for the MAGA insurgents? How will they pivot, and how best can we turn the tide? We will speculate on these trajectories in a future update. Smash MAGA, United Front Against Fascism. New levels, enemies, features, new twists. So stay tuned.
recorded yours, but that's the Zoom call. All right, so thanks for being on the show. We're here. We got La Armada. We got Manilo and Paul from the band La Armada. How you guys doing?
Great. Surviving in the city. I appreciate the opportunity, man.
Of course. Thanks a lot for coming on here as well. We've been listening to your guys' songs from your upcoming album, Anti-Colonial Volume 2. That's coming out on February 11th.
Yes, sir.
That's Manilo's birthday too.
Oh,
it's my birthday too, yo.
Oh, no way. That's awesome. Happy early birthday, man. It's gonna be exciting.
I mean, we planned it that way, bro.
We planned it that way.
Very excited, man. That's you guys' own record label, Mal de Ojo?
That's right.
That's correct. Mal de Ojo, the evil eye record. That's our own label. We're operating under that name for the distribution of the record in Latin America and here in the U.S.
Awesome. Congrats, man. You guys had a few songs already out on your Bandcamp you can listen to right now, but it's pre-order available. Sounds great, man. You guys have been making music for like 20 years. Congratulations. You're like scene veterans now. How do you guys feel?
Hey, I was just telling Paul, I told Paul, you know, we played here in 2007 for the first time, I think. And like 90% of the bands that were around when we started playing Chicago shows, they're not really around anymore, you know. Barely, only a handful of bands are still playing. So yeah, it definitely feels like, you know, you're a veteran, but it also reminds you of always looking for new challenges and to push yourself to do something new all the time and just enjoy the process, you know, the secret for longevity, I guess.
I think we're musically too. I think we're still figuring it out. So we still feel in that sense like we got a long way to go.
Yeah, man. It's always got to keep evolving. You know, you guys new members of the band. I remember watching when you joined, you know, when fucking your new singer and the drummer joined the band as well, too. It's, you know, new musicians bring new elements to the band, you know.
Yeah, it's definitely been a process of learning from the process itself, rolling with the punches. And some way, somehow, we managed to maintain it cohesive and, in our opinion, create the best music we have as a band so far.
Yeah. Now you guys have two guitar players, of course, but I think I saw at least one show, Manilo, when it was just you, just a three-piece, no guitar, just bass.
Yeah, it was a three-piece experiment.
Yeah, just fucking crank the bass and, you know.
Experimental days.
Yeah. So I got some like serious type questions, you know, get a chance to talk about the various shit that's been going down. Obviously, you know, the live music scene has totally changed since the pandemic started. You know, as venues have a hard time hosting indoor shows, venues closing, some bands have been on hiatus or calling it quits altogether. You guys, you know, how have you guys been faring during the pandemic as a band?
It's been rough. It's been real rough. I mean, we personally have been lucky that we've been able to maintain like employment. So in that sense, like at the end of the day, we've had food and we've had shelter, but on a band level and on a personal level, it's been hard, mentally, emotionally, because we were touring a lot before the pandemic. It seems like 8-10 years before it hit, we were on tour 100 days out of the year, 80 days out of the year, and then when that goes away so suddenly and unexpectedly, a lot of us felt it's almost like you lose your identity.
Yeah.
It happened to me. I was like, okay, so who the fuck am I and what the fuck do I do really? Like, am I just a dude with a job? Like, what's going on here? So we took it as an opportunity to write music and also to work on our inner relationships.
That's good shit, man. Take the opportunity to kind of think about some other stuff.
So it's definitely like a scary thing to see a lot of your peers going on hiatus or just quitting altogether, you know. Like a lot of people that you look up to, or that you were brought up together, like you know, you in the trenches touring, and then you next thing you know, it was like, yeah, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not playing anymore. I'm done. That's all done with. It was a very scary place to be mentally, and yeah, it the only thing we could do was channel that energy into writing more music.
How did you guys feel when, over the summer, like last summer, once people started getting vaccinated, people started doing shows again? Did you guys get all anxious when shows started popping up again?
Yeah, and no. Seeing live music for the first time was incredible. Playing for the first time was the first time I felt like myself again. But also there's like fear of missing out. Like we weren't quite ready in May when shows started happening. So you're like, oh fuck, am I missing the small window that may close again? Like there's also a lot of that, just to keep it real.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think for those of us who are like, within the scene and with, colleagues of us that are organizing shows and we have an insight on what's going on behind the curtain, every show that you see is one step from being canceled all the time. If every show that ends up happening is a miracle that it happened, because with COVID, everything has to be planned way ahead nowadays. And you just never know who's gonna get sick. It's like a chain reaction. Somebody gets sick, next thing you know, the sound guy can't make it, or the venue's closed altogether, or the headlining band. We had a show in December with the Suicide Machines, and it got canceled like 3 days before the show because somebody got COVID. So in the blink of an eye, like something that you plan for 3-4 months in advance, it goes down the drain.
That you already you spent time on it to get prepared. You already spent money on it. You already canceled some other shit, told somebody you weren't going to their birthday, like all this shit to do that. And then you just got to brush it off. Like, oh, it got canceled. It is what it is.
I've seen some venues be doing rapid tests for COVID at the door. I always wonder, let's say the band shows up to the gig and one of them has COVID there and then, and everyone's like, sorry, everybody, you're in the middle of a super spreader event.
That's brutal, dude. Especially like, imagine if you're on tour and you're like 5 states away from where you live, and that shit happens. Now you got to cancel everything. So you lose all that, and you got to spend whatever you made to get back home. Like, it's insane. It's a very rough time for independent artists.
And it's also difficult because obviously you don't want nobody getting sick, right? You don't want anybody to get sick. You have loved ones. You don't want to get sick yourself. You don't want people to say you're doing a super spreader. But the punk side of you, the DIY side of you, that always find a way to figure things out. Always
that's for sure, man.
You always find a way to do things, work around whatever is established. Once to go like, yo, fuck it, let's find a way to make a show, to make it safe. Everybody wears a mask. Let's do the vaccination card. So it's a tricky spot to be on, because throughout the whole pandemic, I always have that thought in the back of my head, like how can we make this work? How can we make a show like even in a safe way? It's tricky for sure.
Yeah, DIY shows, people are generally a lot better about wearing masks, and generally people are more conscious about the virus as opposed to a lot of kind of mainstream bars and stuff like that. You might go to a show and people just don't seem to give a fuck at all. But of course, people doing the outdoor shows, generator shows, and you guys did an outdoor fest. You did Burrito Fest this summer. That's a way different situation than an indoor show. How was that? I mean, I was going to ask, what bands were you most excited about playing at that fest, or another show you've done recently?
Oh man, it was a great experience. Growing up in the Dominican Republic, a lot of these bands we grew up listening to, bands like Caifanes,
Cuba, definitely.
Cuba,
Panteón Rococó.
Yeah. Maldita Vecindad, all these bands, they were like staples. And whatever, every time you talk about rock in Spanish, you have to mention those bands.
It's funny because like a lot of the English speaking crowd that know us from like playing in the US, like we would post like, oh, we're playing this festival, and like nobody has a fucking clue for the most part who those bands are. But for us, like Manny said, like those bands are huge
superstars
in Latin America. Yeah, so for us, we're like still like it's actually bands that like our parents know. You know what I mean? So for us, it's like hell yeah, let's do it. It was a great experience. I mean, it's great to play a festival like that, and like you know, the food is like authentic Mexican food, and like you know, we get to talk on stage in Spanish, and people understand. Like, it's just a good vibe.
and it feels great to play a festival as a local band too, you know, and kill it too on the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. Yeah, my brother went, I know, but
Yeah, that was sick, by the way.
Yeah, he was there.
Yeah. It's also cool. It's also cool to be the heavy band in that festival. You know, like that. It's not a heavy festival. Those bands are like alternative, pop rock, stuff like that. And we were by far the heaviest band that played. And that's always a challenge, but it's a challenge that we really like. You know, like if we can get these people moving and we can get these people into the band, then like we will have known that we did a good job. And it's a great challenge. It's just fun to be able to kind of get up there and try to win over that crowd.
Well, y'all were tough though. You know, you performed well. You know, of course, playing a 3 o'clock like slot is kind of difficult. You know what I mean? But I mean, of course, you're competing against a lot of headliners too, though. But
it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to play early like that. But we're kind of used to it by now. Yeah.
That's cool, man. You guys also did Riot Fest actually one time or another, didn't you guys?
Yeah.
We
2017 or 2017 or 18.
Yeah.
What do you guys take on your experience with Riot Fest? You know, maybe in comparison to Burrito Fest, or anything interesting things you want to say about you know, Riot Fest? That's all right.
You know what we're talking about.
I'm just waiting on Paul.
I think we're both waiting for the other thought.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to.
Yeah, we're just fucking with
you know, there's a lot of people say fuck Riot Fest so much that they made a beer.
I want to talk about it. I want to talk about it. Like our experience personally, they treat us very well, very respectfully. We know that the festival is not perfect. We know the festival needs to improve in a lot of ways. For example, I'll give you an example. We did a fundraiser for Asato's daughter.
Oh yeah.
The organization Asato's daughter. We did it at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah.
They have a community center in Douglas Park, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we spoke about how this festival that makes all this money, and it's located in a community, in probably one of the most underserved communities in Chicago. You know, there's no money to be made. Ways where a bigger percentage of the profits stay in the community. How are we gonna develop communities? We're gonna develop communities with economic power, with more money. How are we gonna do that? We're gonna hire local help. We're gonna employ people in the community. We're gonna bring local vendors to the event for people to bring their, you know, whatever they sell their produce to sell it at the space. But I mean, as far as that, they even spoke about maybe the possibility of funding a school or a social center or something for the community in Douglas Park. But I mean, as far as the artists, we will play whatever platform we can play as long as we can say what we are about, and as long as we can educate and bring the message that we bring to anybody, and especially the most misinformed or uninformed people, because it's really easy to play the same punk venue for 20 people and talk about politics to everyone who already knows what we're talking about, you know? So in all, the last thing I want to say about it is like, definitely we feel like we're opening a door for other bands to come, immigrants, people of color, people from the, you know, the different communities, to also be a part of a bigger event, and that representation matters. You know, we are a band that we go on tour a lot with all white bills, playing in an all white crowd every night, singing in Spanish. It's hard, dude. A lot of people will tell you go fuck yourself. There's a lot of people there, they're like openly Trump supporters. So for a band like us to get on a stage like that, I'm sure is very important for a lot of people in this country, in this city, especially. You know?
Well said, man. You made a lot of great points. When I saw you guys in the bill, I'm just like, fuck yeah, because I normally look at the bill and I'm like looking at all these bands that like I don't really care a whole lot about, you know what I mean?
Right.
And you guys are like, a lot of the bands like Anti-Flag, it's, you know, sometimes they're good, they're political bands, but not all the bands are, and there's a lot you could say about the politics of Riot Fest and all that.
Well, it hits different when you bring it up with a local level. You know what I mean? Because we go on stage, we went on stage. We talk about the Cope Academy, we talk about Home and Square, we talk about things that are happening in the community, in the very same community where the festival is happening.
Exactly.
You know? So it brings perspective on people. I like to think.
Yeah, I think we make a bigger difference by playing it than by not playing it. The only way we would not play it if it's like, oh, you got to tone it down, or you can't say this, or you can't say that, or if it was like, I don't know, maybe if it was sponsored by like the U.S. military or some shit like that, or, you know, like, no, we're not going to be about that. But you're giving us the freedom to do our thing, say what we got to say. You're making somewhat of an effort to support this community, and you're going to treat us with respect. Hell yeah, we're going to go on that stage and we're going to crush it. And also too, like, that's hard work, bro. Like getting on that shit was hard work. Like,
yeah, nobody gave us shit, dude. Nobody
gave us shit. You know, we weren't born here. We weren't raised with, oh, so and so is my neighbor, so we got on this fest. Like that happens a lot in the music scene.
Yeah.
Especially the higher you climb, and we've been able to peek through windows where we see that that's a thing, like nepotism in a way, or just relationships from like, I went to preschool with this guy. Like that's not our case.
No.
You know, we came here, we were already in our 20s when we came to this country. So the fact that we got on there as a band that sings in Spanish, as a band that was up there doing fucking guttural screams, you know, like all that shit, like, fuck, you know, that means something to us, and it means something to people like us.
And, you know, that's why, like, a lot of people respect you over the years, because you have held this consistently. You've always been about that life. And, you know, you've done, you know, so much for the scene in Chicago, you know what I'm saying? Like, more than any of these, like, other, like you're talking about, the entrenched, like,
punk elite.
Yeah. Who ain't done, oh, they're from Chicago, they ain't done shit for the city, you know?
Yeah.
Hey, nobody can say we haven't played benefit shows for 10 weekends straight, you know, for 5 summers in a row. Happily.
This is definitely something that should be talked about. I appreciate that you brought it up, because we talk about it a lot. And regardless, even if we don't play, we attend Riot Fest, right? I like to go see the band, but I also like to see the community and the environment outside, and the hustle, and the people selling hot dogs, and you know what I mean, like water, whatever they're selling. You know, I seen people like parking, like with private parking spots, you know, renting their parking spots and shit. So I definitely see people like with the opportunity to hustle a little bit of money every year. And then we were just talking about like, yo, I see the community bumping, you know, trying to make some money and shit. But a lot more could be done. I really believe a lot more could be done.
A lot more can be done. A lot more can always be done.
Yeah, man, you guys are doing it though.
Speaking of the parking thing, I remember there was some controversy with Riot Fest over city officials was selling public parking lots to like Riot Fest attendees, like
Alderman Cardenas. Is that the guy? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, they put the fence around it and people spray paint.
And then they shut the park down for like days, even a week afterwards.
Yeah, because it's a public park, you know, the neighborhood uses it. So, hey, you're going to ask about, because, you know, another thing that people are doing during the pandemic instead of shows, making music videos. You guys have always been making very cool music videos. One I was going to ask about recently is this Checkmate Humanity from Anti-Colonial Volume 2 coming out. That's a cool ass video. I saw the interview with Tatiana about the collaboration. How'd you guys put it together?
All her, bro. All her. All praises to her.
Yeah.
John Kediak, the producer, the director. Jonathan Stale, the director of photography. She's a Dominican contemporary dancer, and she's based out of Berlin. And we got to see a movie that she did called Quisqueya, and it's about racism and colorism in the Dominican Republic and Haiti. And it blew our mind. And so we always wanted to have a visual of one of our songs that would kind of represent the rhythm, so people would like understood where we're coming from, the Afro kind of Caribbean rhythms that we throw into punk. So when we saw her piece, we decided to approach her to see if she wanted to do it, and she was game. She really wanted to, and it's our favorite piece of visual art that we've done. It's also the best one because we didn't have to do shit for it, and making videos is a pain in the ass. So basically, we told her more or less the meaning of the song, kind of what we wanted, and then we just let her do her thing. And she came to us like, look, and we were like, yeah, it's perfect. We made no changes to it.
Yeah, I know it's also a way to collaborate with other peers and people who are doing different arts. You know, it's a way for us to apply what we learned in the punk scene. You know, as like how we work together through mutual aid. If we're gonna make all these videos, I'm gonna have my friend who's a videographer, I'm gonna have my friend who's a director, I'm gonna have my friend who dances, and we all gonna come up together, you know? There's a lot of ego in like other areas of art. We notice that a lot. We always talk about it because when you play in a punk band, you experience rejection every day, right? It's like normal. Like nobody's watching your set, whatever. You're still gonna have fun, you know. But it's not the case in other areas of art we came to notice, right?
Yeah.
But we try to apply what we learn, you know, working together, the DIY style into the videos, and it's proven to work. It's worked out really good. We created a lot of good material, and we're really happy with it.
Yeah, man. So you guys got the album out. It's coming out in fucking like 3 weeks. And you guys got the show at the Coca Lounge. That's the 26th, the release show.
That's correct.
I'm gonna check it out.
That's the thing, man. We're ready to play, bro. Like, we're ready to play. It's been 2 years where we hardly been able to play. Like, we want to get on that stage, man.
Are you guys gonna try to do a tour in the summer?
Yeah. I mean, we have a tour in Europe that's booked. That's been booked.
Been booked since the beginning, since before the pandemic, bro.
Yeah, it's been booked since 2019, and it keeps being pushed. So hopefully that happens. And if it doesn't happen, then we'll just do like a U.S. tour.
Awesome. When's that at? When are you guys gonna start on that tour?
The European thing is supposed to start at the end of June and go to the middle of July. Yeah, festivals, shows on our own, shows with other bands. Europe is great to tour, man. The hospitality is way better. The food's way better. It's a great experience.
Where are you most excited about going?
Me, I like being in Spain.
We're trying to also go to South America this year for the first time.
Yeah, we want to go to South America this year.
And, you know, we had a lot of people who have been listening to our music for years there, and a lot of people are digging the new music too. Places like Chile, Brazil, Argentina. We've never been there. A lot of people fuck with our music down there, and we can't wait to go. We're going to try to go this year.
Yeah.
That's cool. We touched on so much shit, man. Anything else you guys want to put out there as we get to the end of the interview?
Hey, shout out to the working people, all the people that kept everything fucking running through this pandemic, bro. All the immigrant labor, all the people that got up in the fucking morning, maintenance workers, fucking mechanics, delivery people, the medical staff, all the people who fucking make sure everything was up and running and risking their fucking life every day. You know, we appreciate you, and let's try to play some music, man.
Man, that's what's up, man. Bro. That's quite a shout out. Shout out to the working class, man.
Yeah, to all the work. Hey, it's true, bro. It's like I went out there every motherfucking day. You know, even in the first days of the pandemic, when everybody was like chilling at the crib, and all I saw was people risking their life, freezing to death, You know what I mean? Leaving their kids at home, risking bringing getting somebody sick at home to keep everything running. And it's like, we talk about the heroes. The heroes. These people are the heroes. The people who fucking showed up to work every day to make sure everything was up and running, bro.
Yeah, you're right, man. So a lot of people are realizing this. We've seen people rising up against, racism, capitalism, fascism these last couple of years. Do you guys think it's encouraging? Does it give you guys hope for the future? Or do you think we're all doomed anyway and we're all fucked no matter what happens?
No, I mean, if you fucking with politics, radical politics, you always gotta feel that there's hope in there. You can't turn bitter, bro. You can't be like, oh, we're doomed. It's never gonna happen. This is exactly the point that we're doing this, But it definitely shows that we're disposable for the elite. The working people, they don't give a fuck about us. They don't give a fuck if we get sick, if we die there, as long as the profits keep showing up and turning in. At the same time, I'm not gonna let that shit discourage me for not fighting and not doing what I came here to do. What is my calling, and what a lot of people. I always say this in interviews. Like, there's a lot of people that are boots on the ground every day, working to make a positive contribution. Social workers, school teachers, activists, whatever you want to call it. The problem is they don't have the resources and they don't get the exposure that they need to effectively do their job. I'm tired of people saying, no, nothing's going to change, nobody cares. And there's a lot of people working every day and actually doing great things. And you know this. You guys both know this.
Yeah, definitely. People are on the move, man,
It's kind of disrespectful to them to get discouraged.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you're talking about the burnout earlier and stuff, but there's also, a whole new crop of punks, man. There's hope. The youth ain't taking no shit no more, man.
Yeah.
It is true. It is true. Like, it's definitely trending in the right direction in a lot of ways. My hope is that enough people catch on in time before we, I don't know, destroy the earth.
Shit. I don't think so, man. The earth's too strong.
Yeah.
True. It just needs to wipe us out, and it'll be fine.
Well, let's leave on a good note, huh? Yeah. No, thanks a lot so much for coming on here, you guys. It's been great talking with you guys. Thanks a lot.
Much respect.
Much respect to you both and to the
Respect and love.
Right back to you. Shout out to Smash MAGA, the game. Shout out to Books to Prisoners.
The America that we know and love doesn't exist anymore. Massive demographic changes have been foisted upon the American people. And they're changes that none of us ever voted for and most of us don't like.